was ultimately convicted of those crimes as well as 3 other murders a few years prior in Louisiana, and he has since been executed. So let's go ahead and get into the story. This can be found on a site that's abuse, which included taking acid more than 100 times. Following his discharge from the military, Danny managed to marry and begin what appeared to be a normal life. Then the cycle of abuse continued. At age 23, after being with his wife for 4 years, she separated Students triple-locked doors, and some slept in shifts so someone was awake at all times. By the end of August, thousands of students left campus, and around 700 never came back because they feared for their lives. Danny Rowling's father, who was a 20-year-old veteran cop of the Shreveport Police Department, had not only taught his son how to take abuse all of his life, but he also taught Danny how to cover his tracks. Police couldn't find enough evidence at crime scenes to implicate Danny Rowling. Instead of leaving the duct tape on the dead bodies, Danny disposed of it in dumpsters to get rid of any fingerprints. Danny also used cleaning solvents on the dead bodies to remove any traces of semen. Some of the female bodies were left in sexually suggestive positions, which offered authorities a clue into the killer's method. The Gainesville Ripper continued to steal from homes and gas stations until he was finally caught in Ocala after a high-speed chase. He was wanted for the robbery of a Winn-Dixie, as authorities still did not know that he was the Gainesville Ripper. That was on September 8th, 2 weeks after the murders. The triple murder in Shreveport of Julie Grissom, her father and nephew, clued the Gainesville police into their suspect. Grissom's corpse was left in a sexual position. She was also stabbed to death. It wasn't until January 1991, more than 4 months after the murders, that police caught a break. Because of the similarities of the murders in Shreveport and Gainesville, Florida, investigators sought DNA of prisoners who were incarcerated. Danny Rowling's DNA was similar enough to DNA left at the Gainesville murder scenes to charge him with murder. Rowling confessed to being the Gainesville Ripper. Prosecutors found enough evidence to convict him, and he was subsequently executed on October 25th, 2006 in Florida. A total of 47 people witnessed the execution of the Gainesville Ripper, which is double the capacity of the viewing room. Rowling's last meal consisted of a lobster tail served with drawn butter, butterfly shrimp with cocktail sauce, a baked potato with sour cream and butter, strawberry cheesecake, and sweet tea. On Rowling's deathbed, the 52-year-old sang a hymn-type song that rambled on for 5 verses. He called on the tunes of his childhood when he learned how to play guitar to find peace before his execution, but that's not quite the end of the story. Kevin Williamson was an aspiring writer in the 90s when the Gainesville Ripper murders caught his attention. He used the case to create a screenplay for a horror movie which revolved around the murders of college students and the media frenzy that ensued. That screenplay turned into the 1996 cult classic Scream. Although the Scream franchise follows high school students, Williamson